Good afternoon, I should say good evening, and welcome back to Answers on Eschatology. My name is Dan Derry, and I'm the president of the Institute of Fulfilled Eschatology. Hey, I want to share some concluding thoughts on Matthew 24:37, really through 41, and we've been looking at the idea of the coming of the Son of Man as the days of Noah. And what I really want to get into and pull out in this video is the fact that the coming of the Lord at the end of the age in AD 70 was just like Noah's judgment. It was a judgment of a covenant world that ended in old creation and brought into being, into full manifestation, a new world. Noah, when he got off the ark, he didn't step onto a new planet. He stepped into a renewed covenant with God. God gave him the same mission and mandate that he had given to Adam in the beginning before the fall. And the same is true with those in Christ, those who had come through judgment in him and had escaped the wrath to come in the first century, entered into the new creation, left that old covenant world behind, and they entered into a renewed, restored covenantal relationship with Jehovah. And I want to try to pull that out in this video. And here's what I want to show you. I want to go through several scriptures and really pull out the fact that all through the gospel, all through the New Testament and the Old, but we're not going to go there, there is a covenant world contrast. It is the world from above being contrasted to the world below, the world of spirit, the world of flesh, the world of death and the world of life, the Old Covenant world and the New Covenant world. And we're going to see this. Let's go through these scriptures. Galatians chapter 4, verse 4. But when the fullness of time came, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law. So Jesus came born under the law. He was born under the Old Covenant world, that world of flesh, as we're going to see. John chapter 8, the Gospel of John. Let's take a look at this. John 8, 21 and 20 to 23. He said to them, that's Jesus, I go away and you will seek me and will die in your sin. Where I'm going, you cannot come. So the Jews were saying, surely he will not kill himself, will he? Since he says, where I'm going, you cannot come. And he was saying to them, you are from below. Now, this is Jesus talking to the Jews in his day. You are from below. I am from above. You are of this world. I am not of this world. So Jesus said, they were from the world from up below, the world of flesh, the old covenant world. He was not of that world. He was of the world above. He was of the new covenant world, the world of spirit. See, he was born, he came from that world of spirit. He lowered himself, he emptied himself. He came into the world of flesh under the law, but he was going to leave that world and re-enter his new covenant world. Now watch this. Luke chapter 9. Gospel of Luke, chapter 9, 30 and 31. This is on the Mount of Transfiguration. And behold, two men were talking with him, that's with Jesus, and they were Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory, speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. This word departure is Exodus. It's the Exodus, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Well, what was he about to accomplish at Jerusalem? His death, burial, and his resurrection. This was his Exodus out of that world of flesh that he came into, and into the world of spirit, the world from above, that he would enter into through his resurrection and subsequent ascension. Jesus was the forerunner. He was the first to make this exodus, but the purpose of him making the exodus was to bring that new covenant world, that new covenant people with him. And we're going to see this. Remember, he went through an exodus first. It was his baptism. Watch this, Mark chapter 10 and verse 38. Mark 10, 38 and 39. Now this is the sons of Zebedee asking Jesus to sit on one on his right hand and one on his left in his kingdom. And he says this, but Jesus said to them, you do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drank? That's the cup of suffering. Or to be baptized with the baptism which I am baptized? That is the baptism of his exodus. Out of the old world, dying to that old world, and being raised into a new creation, into the new world that he was establishing. They said to him, we are able. Verse 39, and Jesus said to them, the cup that I drink, you shall drink. Yep, you're going to suffer with me. And you shall be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. Jesus said, yep, You're going to go through this too. You're going to leave this old covenant world too, and you're going to enter into a new kingdom. You're going to enter into a world from above, the world of spirit. Now watch this. Romans chapter 6. We see this exodus through baptism into Christ being worked out in the disciples' life. They were following the forerunner. Romans 6, 3-5. Or do you not know that all of us who have been baptized into Christ have been baptized into his death, his exodus? Right? Therefore, we have been buried with him, through baptism into death, so that as Christ was raised from the dead out of that old world, through the glory of the Father, that we too might walk in newness of life. But what is this newness of life? It is living in the world above. For if we have become united with him in the likeness of his death, certainly we should also be in the likeness of his resurrection. In other words, they had exited out of that old covenant world through baptism into Christ, but they had not yet fully entered into his resurrection, into the world from above. Now watch this. Romans chapter 7. Let's go on. Verses 5 and 6. For while we were in the flesh, that's in the old covenant world. Paul's not talking biology. He's still in a body. He says, while we were in the flesh, that world from below, the sinful passions which were aroused by the law, that's the world of flesh, were at work in the members of our body to bear fruit to death. But now we have been released from the law. How were they released? Through baptism into Christ. They had left that old covenant world through baptism, and they were released from the law of that world. Having been released from the law, having died to that which by we were bound, so that we would serve in newness of the Spirit and not in the oldness of the letter. That was the purpose, so that they would serve in the newness of the Spirit in the world from above, but it was not yet finished. Romans chapter 8, let's look at another one, in verses 8-9. And those who are in the flesh cannot please God. Oh my, if this is talking biology, none of us are pleasing to God, but it's not. Those who are in the old covenant world, the world from below, the world of flesh, could not please God. Verse 9, however, you were not in the flesh, but in the Spirit. Why? Because they had been raised with Christ out of that old world, and they were partaking of the age to come. They were partaking of the world of spirit in Christ. Now, let's go to 1 Timothy 3:16. With this background, let's understand what Jesus is talking about here, what Paul is talking about regarding Jesus. 1 Timothy 3:16. By common confession, great is the mystery of godliness. He was revealed in the flesh. That is his coming into the world of flesh. He was born under the law. He was revealed in the flesh, but vindicated in the Spirit. He was raised, glorified, vindicated in a different world, in the world above. He was vindicated in the world of spirits. Now watch this. 1 Peter 3:18. We're going to see basically the same thing again, but I want to close in 1 Peter 3 and 4. Watch this. 1 Peter 3:18 and following. For Christ also died once for sins once for all, the just for the unjust, so that he might bring us to God. Again, the purpose of his exodus, his dying to the old world, being raised into a new creation, was that we might be brought with him. So that he might bring us to God, having been put to death in the flesh. This is the same as 1 Timothy 3:16. He was put to death in the old covenant world. Did he die in the body? Yeah, but that's not the covenantal significance of this verse or this context. He was put to death in that flesh world, but made alive in spirit. He was raised to newness of life in a new covenant world, in the world of spirit. Now watch this, verse 19, in which he, also, in that death to the old covenant world, he went to Hades and he made proclamation to the spirits now in prison, who were once disobedient, when this patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah, during the construction of the ark, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were saved, were brought safely through the water. Now, in the context of flesh and spirit worlds that Jesus exited and entered into, Peter conjures up the imagery of Noah's ark. And he talks about the flood and the ark and it is through that ark, entering into the ark, that they were at that time saved. They were brought out of that world and into a new creation. But watch this. Corresponding to that, what? The ark. Baptism now saves you. What baptism? The same baptism we saw in Romans 6, 7, and into 8 is the baptism into Christ that takes them out of that old covenant world and puts them in a new realm, a realm of spirit. That is the Exodus. That baptism into Christ was just like the ark in Noah's day. It was a vehicle that transported them out of one world and into another. And watch this. In this context, for the sake of time, I'm just going to jump ahead to 1 Peter chapter 4. In this context, Peter says this in verse 6 and 7. For the gospel has for this purpose, what? Taking them out of an old world and bringing them into a new creation has been preached even to those who are dead, that through that though they are judged in the flesh as men, all men are judged out of that new covenant world. They are judged in the world below as men, that they may live in the spirit according to the will of God. They were put to death. They were judged under that old covenant world, under the world opposed to the world of spirits, that they might live through their resurrection in newness of life according to the will of God. And watch what Peter says. The end of all things is near. And this is in the context of verse 5, by the way, where he says they must give account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. And that judgment would be the end of all things. It was the judgment of the old covenant world, of all those who had died in faith and out of faith, who had either boarded the ark or not boarded the ark through baptism into Christ. And those who had would enter into the new covenant world, the new covenant kingdom. And those who hadn't, for them, it would be the end of all things. It would be the judgment of all flesh. And Peter, as I've said before, in verse 7, the end of all things is a direct allusion to Genesis 6:13 and the flood. And this is the context Peter's in. He's in the context of them boarding the ark through baptism into Christ. They are boarding Christ. They are entering into him to escape the judgment of the world. And it is the judgment of all flesh. It is the judgment of that flesh world. And it was the end of all things covenantally for that covenant people. And that's what Jesus means when he says the coming of the Son of Man to remove that old covenant world, to end that age, would be as the days of Noah. It would be the removal of an old covenant world, a world of flesh, the world from below. And it would take that righteous remnant out of that world and deposit them, translate them into the new covenant kingdom, the world from above in Jesus Christ. And that took place at the fall of Jerusalem and the removal of that world of flesh and that old covenant kingdom in AD 70. Thanks for your time. Appreciate you being patient. I know I went way over. We'll pick up it next time on Answers on Eschatology. I'll do my best to stay shorter. Bye for now.